Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we dive into a shadowy corner of Roman life that you're definitely not going to hear about in your high school history class. You're standing barefoot on a mosaic floor, oil lamps flickering gently against the marble walls. The villa is grand, serene, but then there it is, the latrina, a lonely little room tucked behind a curtain, dead silent except for the faint drip of water echoing off stone. You step closer. The air is still, too still. Your ears prick up. You're not sure why, but something feels off. This isn't just a place to relieve yourself. It's a place where rich men, senators, generals, philosophers have met their end, and now you're beginning to understand why. See, the Romans were obsessed with order, prestige, and public performance. Everything was on display, except for what happened behind that curtain. But even here, the dangers didn't stop. They just changed shape. You've heard of battlefield wounds, of poison in wine, of daggers between ribs in the Senate. But what if I told you the bathroom was just as deadly? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world we're all falling asleep together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're approaching the latrina in a typical Roman villa. These weren't plush little powder rooms. No, they were sparse, functional, and alarmingly quiet. Sometimes just a stone bench with a hole in it. A hole that connected to a long dark channel carved under the city. That silence you hear, it's not peace. It's the potential for something to go horribly, historically wrong. Imagine being a Roman senator, draped in a snowy white toga, sandals clicking on cool marble. You dismiss your guards. This is your private time, after all. You draw the curtain, sit down, and then you hesitate. Not because of modesty, but because, well, what if today's the day someone's waiting down there? It sounds paranoid until you remember that Roman sewers were teeming with life, not metaphorically, literally. Rats the size of loaves, snakes slipping through the filth, and sometimes worse. But that's a story for a later section. Right now, you're just trying to clear your mind. But the air is strange. It's thick, slightly sulfuric. You light a small oil lamp nearby. The flame flutters. You lean in and suddenly realize that lighting a fire near a Roman toilet is probably not a good idea. Spoiler, we'll get to why in section 4. Boom. In this dim room, you begin to feel the claustrophobia creep in. The smell, yes, but also the sense of being entirely alone. Trapped. You can't see what's under you. You can't hear what might be moving. There's no water flush, no ventilation, just a pit of darkness. The Romans didn't invent flush toilets, but they did invent suspenseful bathroom horror. And here's where things get creepy. There are actual recorded accounts, not just legends, of people attacked while relieving themselves. Roman historian Alice Gellius wrote of men who never returned from their bathroom breaks. Some were found slumped over, blue-lipped, possibly poisoned by gas or by design. Others were never found at all. Historians still argue whether these cases were exaggerated, the textbooks say politely. But let's be real. If you were a political enemy in ancient Rome, the toilet was the last place anyone expected you to disappear. Now, zoom out a bit. This isn't just one villa. This is Rome, an empire of echoing marble and murky plumbing. The rich had indoor toilets, yes, but many were built with little understanding of gas flow or sewage pressure. There were no safety valves, no odor traps. If something noxious built up under the city, it just rose, slowly, invisibly. In the Senate, they weren't above fear. In fact, they were among the most anxious people in the empire. Constant plotting, constant whispers. So even a private moment became a strategic risk. You never wanted to spend too long in the latrina. You certainly never wanted to fall asleep in one. Let's not even get into the sponge on a stick yet. But here's the real kicker. Despite all this, Romans valued their bathrooms. They decorated them. They added mosaics. Some even had statues of gods guarding the latrine entrance, mainly to protect the soul, because let's face it, nothing protects the rear end. But did it help? You tell me. And so, you sit there, imagining the most powerful men in the known world hesitating on the toilet seat. That's how dangerous things had become. That's how twisted the fears were. The battlefield had nothing on the latrina. You finally exhale and wipe your forehead, still alive. But the night is young. Word count 1088. Awaiting continue. Bạn đã nói continue. ChatGPT đã nói. Section. You step out of the private latrina and into the bustle of a Roman street, only to find that the public toilets aren't much better. In fact, they might be worse. Imagine this. A long stone bench with keyhole-shaped cutouts, lined side by side like a row of pensive pigeons. No dividers, no doors, just a dozen strangers, shoulder to shoulder, relieving themselves in unison. It's not exactly the quiet dignity of a senator's villa. And yet, this was the norm. You ease yourself down between a retired soldier and a chatty merchant. The room is echoing with conversation, politics, gossip, dinner plans. But beneath the idle chatter lies something darker. You feel the air shift. A gust of wind rushes up the hole below you. And just like that, You're reminded this isn't just a toilet, it's a tunnel connected to every other latrine in the neighborhood. Anything or anyone could travel through it. Public toilets in Rome were technically marvels of engineering. They used a system called the Cloaca Maxima, one of the earliest complex sewer networks in the world. Water from nearby aqueducts flowed through stone channels beneath the toilets, carrying away waste. Sounds great in theory, but in practice, that same water could backflow during heavy rain or when the drains clogged, resulting in, let's just say, an unwelcome splash. And that communal sponge, oh, you'll meet it in detail soon. But right now, just know that it floats in a shallow bowl of salt water, passed hand to hand like a sacred relic of hygiene. You eye it with suspicion, but you're not worried about that right now. You're too distracted by the stories swirling around these public spaces. Because here, things happened. Deals were struck, rumors were born, and enemies were conveniently removed. It wasn't uncommon for public latrines to be used as ambush spots. Think about it. A crowded space with minimal escape routes, people vulnerable, distracted. You could follow a man in, and if timed right, he might not come out again. Some senators even sent their slaves ahead to inspect the facilities before stepping inside. Historians still argue whether certain high-profile disappearances happened in these grimy corners of the city or in more dignified locations. But the fact that the latrina was even considered a likely murder scene says everything about the Roman state of paranoia. And here's the part that makes you want to clench your gluteus maximus a little tighter. Toilets weren't always ground level. Some were raised, and beneath them, a direct drop into the sewers. Dark, slimy, and crawling with who knows what. A child falling in might vanish entirely. A grown man could dislocate something. And then there were the creatures. You're sitting still, listening to the low hum of flowing water beneath you. The soldier beside you shifts and mutters, "Better here than out there." You raise an eyebrow. He continues, "At least in here, the gods can hear you." Ah, yes, the gods. Even in public toilets, Romans called on divine protection. It wasn't unusual to see little shrines or graffiti invoking Cloacina, goddess of the sewer. One scratched inscription reads, "Cloacina, keep me safe from what slithers." Not exactly poetic, but heartfelt. In fact, many Romans believed that evil spirits could enter through the toilet, not metaphorical ones, actual spirits. Portals, they said. Places where the barrier between the physical and supernatural worlds was thin, thin enough to let things through. You shift uncomfortably on the stone. It's not just ghosts, though. Roman toilets were hotspots for supernatural anxiety. People tied charms to the walls. They wore protective amulets around their waists. One senator supposedly refused to use any public toilet unless he had his lucky snake-tooth pendant tucked under his tunic. Was he mocked? Constantly. Was he ever attacked in the bathroom? Never. The fear wasn't only about murder or monsters. There was also shame. Imagine being a man of status, caught groaning in a public latrina with a bad case of food poisoning from last night's undercooked dormouse. Not a great look. Your political opponents wouldn't let that go. There are recorded speeches where senators ridiculed each other's toilet habits as part of legal attacks. Talk about character assassination by constipation. So when senators opted for the privacy of their own latrina at home, it wasn't just a luxury, it was a strategic decision. Safer, cleaner, but as you're starting to realize, not by much. Section 3. You wake up in the middle of the night in your opulent Roman villa. The marble floor is cold beneath your feet as you shuffle toward the latrina, holding a tiny oil lamp to light the way. It's dead silent again, and somehow that silence makes everything louder. Your heartbeat, the creaking of the wooden door, the subtle hiss of wind moving through the plumbing. You lift the lid, glance into the hole, and hesitate. Word count 1099. Awaiting, continue. Let's start with eels. Romans loved them. Delicious, they said. They even raised them in backyard ponds. But some of those eels escaped into the sewer system, where they found themselves quite at home, slippery, strong, and occasionally very curious about light and warmth, like, say, the warmth of a human behind. You might think that's the worst of it, but no, it gets better. Snakes, real ones, slithering through the damp, dark tunnels, feasting on rats and insects. Occasionally, they'd follow the rising heat and scent of a latrine user and pop their little heads up through the toilet hole. Yes, people were bitten. No, they didn't always survive. Historians still argue whether these attacks were common or merely a few sensationalized cases. But records mention serpent intrusions in the latrina more than once, and once is already one too many when you're pants down and vulnerable. And let's not forget rats. Roman sewers were rodent paradise, endless tunnels, leftover food bits, warm water, and, well, a lot of poop. Some rats reportedly grew to alarming sizes, big enough to spook a soldier, big enough to bite. Now imagine you're a Roman senator, rich, powerful, draped in embroidered linen, and in the middle of a midnight visit to the toilet, something cold and damp brushes your thigh from beneath the seat. You scream. No one hears you. You lunge backward and slip on the wet stone floor. Your dignity dies before you do. That's why some elite Romans employed toilet attendants whose job was not to clean, but to guard. Yes, there were people, paid or enslaved, who stood just outside the door, listening, waiting for the senator to finish, not for etiquette, for rescue duty. But the fear ran even deeper. There was a Roman belief that spirits of the underworld could travel through water, especially dirty water. If you were being haunted, it wasn't the bedroom mirror you had to worry about. It was the latrina, the portal. To fight this, Romans used protective amulets, carvings of phalluses, yes, really, bells, bones, or images of deities like Mercury or Hercules. Some even tied small figures beneath the toilet bench. You know, just in case something from below reached up. One oddly charming tidbit: there's graffiti in Pompeii's bathrooms that references these fears. A scratched note reads, "Beware the bite from below." I named him Marcus. Either someone had a dark sense of humor, or they were genuinely on a first-name basis with the toilet monster. Still, there was a practical side to the paranoia. Roman toilets had no trap system like modern ones. Today's toilets use water seals to keep gases and vermin out. But back then, the latrina was essentially a hole with direct access to the sewer. Anything in the sewer could theoretically come back up. Some tried to solve this. Wealthy homes installed small grills over their toilet holes, stone slabs with narrow gaps. Others built S-shaped stone chutes to make it harder for snakes or rodents to reach the surface. But nothing worked perfectly, and so senators began to adopt a strange routine. Before using the toilet, they'd drop pebbles in, listening for splashes or growls. They'd wave incense around the hole, hoping the smoke would drive out any lurking creatures. And they never, ever sat for long. A quick in and out, maximum efficiency, minimum exposure. Because at the end of the day, the fear wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. These men ruled an empire, yet the latrina, this tiny disgusting space, stripped away their power, made them human, vulnerable, mortal. Even emperors feared it, especially emperors. So as you sit there now, imagining the Senate's finest quivering on cold stone, you get it. You really do. The bathroom wasn't just a danger to their health, it was a danger to their ego. And when you feel something shift beneath you, a gentle slosh from the dark, don't worry. It's probably just the wind. Probably. Section 4. The next morning, you're back in the latrina. You bring a fresh oil lamp and some incense, because now you know better. You wave the incense in small circles over the opening, watching the smoke curl and drift downward like a warning signal. You're not just checking for spirits or snakes anymore. You're checking for something even deadlier. Fire. Yes, fire. Because sometimes Roman toilets exploded. Let's set the scene. Beneath your stone bench, the sewer network is quietly bubbling away. Organic waste, heat from the Mediterranean sun, and stagnant water combine into a perfect cocktail. Add time, and what do you get? Methane, a whole lot of it. Now imagine lighting an oil lamp too close to the latrine hole, or tossing in a bit of smoldering incense, just a casual flick of the wrist. What happens next? Boom! A small methane explosion shoots a flame up through the hole like a dragon sneeze. Sounds like a fringe accident, right? Except it wasn't. Roman engineers were clever, but even they didn't fully understand the volatile chemistry happening underground. They built these long sewer channels with limited ventilation. Add in the gas from decomposition, and you had an invisible, pressurized fuse waiting to be lit. There are scattered Roman texts. Pliny the Elder mentions odd underground vapors that could strike the unwary with flame. And while historians still argue whether these incidents were common or rare, the fact that there's written evidence at all suggests at least a few very unfortunate souls learned the hard way. One minute you're relaxing, the next you're literally on fire from below. You can't help but wince at the thought. A Roman senator, pants down, toga bunched at the knees, suddenly yelping as his backside meets a plume of fire. Not exactly the dignified image of empire. To prevent this, wealthy households started modifying their toilets. Some place small lids or stones over the holes when not in use, like a low-tech gas cap. Others installed water-filled bowls beneath the seat, an early attempt at creating a vapor seal. The poor, of course, had no such protection. Their best defense was speed. You reach down and carefully lift the stone lid, giving it a cautious sniff. Is that sulfur? Or just yesterday's garum sauce? Hard to tell. And then there's the urban myth. Every city has one. In Rome, it was the story of Senator Gaius Flavius. Pompous, portly, and terribly unlucky. They say he died not from politics or poison, but from an ill-timed matchstick over a full latrine. The explosion singed his eyebrows and sent him stumbling out the villa, toga ablaze. He collapsed in the fountain, naked and steaming. The servants didn't even know where to look. Was it true? No one knows. But the story survived, which says something. Probably that Romans enjoyed a little slapstick with their sanitation nightmares. One engineer, Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, actually warned about such issues in his writings. He described ways to angle pipes, direct airflow, and prevent the backbursting of noxious fumes. He didn't use the word explosion, of course. That would have been too crude, but he knew. Oh, he knew. Romans were practical people, but they were also deeply suspicious. If something exploded unexpectedly, it wasn't just gas, it was a bad omen, a warning from the gods, or worse, a curse from a political rival. Senators who experienced toilet mishaps would sometimes send offerings to the temple the next day, just to be safe. And here's a quirky little ritual you might have joined if you lived back then. Fumigatio cloacarum, basically sewer fumigation. Once in a while, a wealthy neighborhood would pool funds to cleanse their local latrines by burning herbs and wafting smoke through the pipes. Whether it worked or not was debatable, but at least it smelled better. Briefly, so you're sitting there now, incense still smoldering nearby, and you understand the tension. The fear wasn't just of what lurked in the dark, it was what might erupt from it. Bathrooms were ticking time bombs, and every visit felt like spinning the wheel. But here's the thing: Romans didn't stop using them, they just adapted. Some carried small charms to guard against flame. Others made sure to leave the door cracked in case they had to bolt. A few even took to using chamber pots and tossing the contents from second-story windows, which introduced a whole different set of hazards for pedestrians. And you, modern, comfortable you, begin to feel something resembling respect for these ancient toilet warriors. They faced fire, pests, and plumbing failures with nothing but a stick sponge and some olive oil. That's bravery. Just don't forget your lamp. Or better yet, maybe leave it outside the door. Section 5. So, let's say you've survived the snakes, avoided the flame, and escaped a rat nibbling your ankle. But don't relax yet, because the real danger, it might be in the walls. You're sitting in the senator's private latrina again, one of those fine marble rooms with ivory inlays and painted frescoes of nymphs pretending not to notice you doing your business. And as you sit, you hear something, a whisper, or maybe just the stone settling. But it makes your skin crawl anyway, because deep down, you know what Roman elites feared just as much as flames and filth: eavesdropping. In ancient Rome, even bathrooms were political arenas. Senators couldn't trust anyone, not even their own homes, especially their own homes. Walls were thin, servants were everywhere, and rumors flowed faster than sewage through the cloaca maxima. You lean forward, careful not to shift your weight too loudly on the creaking stone bench. If you say something, anything, someone might be listening. It wasn't just paranoia. Roman households were crawling with slaves. Some were loyal, yes, but many were owned by wives, mistresses, political allies, or enemies. If you muttered an offhand comment about Caesar's bald spot while wiping with the communal sponge, odds were that detail ended up in the forum by lunchtime. Historians still argue whether this kind of espionage was truly widespread. The textbooks say. But let's not kid ourselves. Rome thrived on gossip. Senators bribed doormen, cooks, and yes, even toilet attendants for juicy tidbits. What better place to catch someone unguarded than in the bathroom? That's why some senators installed trick walls, stone panels with hollow spaces behind them, hidden passages built not for escape, but for listening. It's also why a few would bring in musicians to strum quietly just outside the latrina, not to relax the nerves, but to mask their conversations. A sort of ancient Roman white noise machine. You sit still, imagining the servant posted outside your door, pretending to sweep the hallway. Maybe he's whistling. Maybe he's memorizing your every word. The danger wasn't just in what you said either. It was how long you stayed inside. Spend too long in the latrina, and someone might assume you're sick, weak, vulnerable. That kind of talk could spread like wildfire in the Senate. Did you hear about Lucius? Spent half the morning groaning behind the curtain. Poor digestion or poor morals. And then there were the double agents, the freedmen and household staff, who were secretly in the pay of rival families. You think you've been clever, but the sponge boy is reporting to Cicero's cousin after sundown. The man delivering your scrolls is also delivering dirt to your enemies. The man holding your perfumed towel may be memorizing your complaints about the emperor. This wasn't madness, it was survival. To cope, many senators developed their own rituals. Some cleared their throats in code patterns before entering the latrina. Others whispered only in Greek, hoping servants wouldn't understand. A few even scrawled notes on the bathroom walls instead of speaking aloud, then erased them with their sleeves. One senator famously demanded his bathroom be inspected daily for hidden mouths, holes bored into the walls for acoustic surveillance. There's even a record of a senator who designed a whisper chute, a curved ceramic pipe leading from the latrina to his study, where his most trusted slave would listen and jot down dictated letters while the senator took care of business. It's either genius or insanity, depending on your view of multitasking. The truth is, bathrooms in ancient Rome weren't sanctuaries. They were the last place you'd let your guard down. Even your most private moments were performance, strategy, risk. It wasn't about modesty. It was about control. And if that sounds exhausting, congrats, you now understand what it meant to be a Roman senator. There was no off switch, no privacy, just layers of surveillance, suspicion, and secrets, all wrapped in a toga. Still, they tried to hide it. You know, with those ridiculous frescoes, cherubs chasing butterflies, dolphins leaping through golden waves, all meant to soothe, to distract, to pretend that everything was fine, that Rome wasn't built on betrayal and backstabbing, that your latrina wasn't bugged. But you're no fool. You stare at the painted dolphin above your head, and you whisper nothing, just in case. Section 6. You're halfway through your morning routine when you hear a noise behind the curtain. Not a whisper this time, but a footstep. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be a servant. Your heart skips. You freeze. See, this is exactly why Roman senators didn't trust their bathrooms. To most, a latrina is just a private space. But to a cunning assassin, it's a trap. One way in, no way out. You're literally caught with your toga down. It was well known in the upper circles of Rome that more than a few powerful men met their ends not on the Senate floor or in battle, but in the most undignified place of all, the toilet. Yes, assassins loved the bathroom, and senators hated that they knew it. The latrina in a wealthy home often sat in a far corner of the villa, away from the social and domestic bustle. A quiet place, tucked behind curtains or down a narrow corridor, perfect for privacy, also perfect for ambush. You glance around. There's no escape route here, just a stone bench, a sponge in a bucket, and a single narrow window too small for even your sandal to fit through. Let's talk tactics. Roman assassins weren't idiots. They waited, watched, listened. They knew that once a senator was seated, he wasn't going anywhere for a few minutes. They knew he'd be alone, unarmed, and distracted. There's no better time for a quick strike. And the targets? They weren't just low-level bureaucrats. Some of the empire's highest-ranking officials were taken out while answering nature's call. One particularly grim tale passed more through whispers than scrolls, speaks of a senator named Livius who was garroted mid-bowel movement, still gripping the edge of his marble bench. The servants found him hours later, slumped and frozen in a position no one wanted to describe. Historians still argue whether this particular death was an exaggeration, a sort of political parable. But the message stuck. Even the toilet wasn't safe. After a while, the Senate began to notice a pattern. People were disappearing during their private moments. So what did they do? They started modifying their bathrooms like fortresses. Some had extra bolts added to the inside of the door. Others placed their latrines next to heavily trafficked hallways. A few even had armed guards posted outside while they did their business, not for modesty, for security. That might sound absurd today, but in ancient Rome, totally normal. In fact, an entire class of bodyguard emerged, latrina protectors, unofficially. These were trusted men, trained not to flinch at the sound of bodily functions, who stood silently outside the curtain, waiting for the senator's return. One wrong sound, one cry for help, and they'd be inside like a thunderbolt, sometimes too late. Now imagine you're an ambitious rival. You've got enemies in the Senate. You know their routines. You know the layout of their homes. And you know exactly when they're most vulnerable. One story tells of a man who trained his attack dog to recognize the scent of a specific senator's perfume. One night, he loosed the dog through a servant's passageway. The senator was discovered moments later, scratched, bleeding, pants around ankles, swearing loudly that Venus herself had cursed him. The dog was never found. Paranoia ran so deep that some senators refused to use their own toilets at all. They would walk to a friend's house or even a bathhouse just to mix up the routine. If that sounds excessive, remember, the Roman elite were masters of overreaction. Even emperors weren't immune. Emperor Caracalla, known for his hair-trigger temper and a face that looked like it had never smiled, reportedly traveled with a custom-built mobile toilet that could be secured on all sides. A kind of ancient Roman panic room with plumbing. Quirky aside, the Roman poet Martial once wrote a sarcastic epigram mocking a senator who carried a dagger into the latrina. He ended the poem with a line that roughly translates to, "Even the gods must tremble at your thunder." Was it about thunderous bowel movements or a threat to anyone lurking nearby? Maybe both. So here you are, still seated, the curtain still rippling slightly from that mysterious footstep. You reach for your walking stick, not because you need help standing, but because it's weighted. Bronze core, just in case. You cough loudly. No reply. You wait another moment, then stand slowly. The sound of your sandals echoes down the hallway. No one's there. Maybe it was your imagination, or maybe it was a message. Because in Rome, you never know if your next trip to the bathroom might be your last. Section 7. You make your way back to your villa's hallway, shaking the last few seconds of paranoia off. It was probably just a servant with bad timing, or perhaps the wind again playing tricks on you. But you still can't shake the feeling that something was off. In ancient Rome, nothing was truly safe, especially not the bathrooms. Now that you've survived that moment, let's delve into the next layer of latrina life. The strange, yet essential, role that toilets played in the realm of Roman social rituals. It might seem odd to think of the latrina as a place for social interaction. After all, it was a spot for relieving oneself. But Roman society, built on gossip and social maneuvering, was far more complicated than that. The latrina, in fact, was one of the few places where senators, citizens, and even slaves could mingle, albeit awkwardly, on equal footing. Yes, the public latrina was a social leveler. You'd share a bench with people of all classes, like-minded senators, merchants, laborers, and, for the unfortunate, thieves. You'd all be exposed to the same fate, waiting your turn and occasionally making polite conversation to ease the discomfort. But here's the thing. Your rank or wealth didn't matter once you entered. You were just another citizen trying to relieve yourself. In the conversation, it was surprisingly businesslike. In the market, you might haggle over a price. In the latrina, you might negotiate over alliances, or worse, spread rumors that could make or break someone's political career. Historians still argue about the depth of these conversations. whether they were only about daily life or whether more sinister plans were hatched there. The whispers you overheard could decide whether an enemy lived to see another day or not. Some even argue that some of Rome's greatest political conspiracies began on the latrina benches. One famous case involves a wealthy merchant named Lucius, who supposedly overheard a senator plotting the downfall of a rival from a neighboring province. He immediately whispered it to his allies in the Senate. That piece of information led to a public disgrace and eventually the downfall of an entire political faction. The merchant, he rose in power and wealth. His casual bathroom chat had changed the course of history. The importance of bathroom talk wasn't lost on the Romans. They were pragmatic people, after all. If you needed information, you didn't always have to attend a dinner party or a political forum. You just had to sit, be patient, and listen to the bathroom gossip. Some took it even further. During the more extravagant political campaigns, candidates would sponsor public latrines. Yes, you read that right. To curry favor with the common people and gain political leverage, these ambitious politicians would pay for the upkeep of public bathrooms, sometimes even going as far as hiring entertainers to play music or recite poetry while citizens took care of their business. Talk about turning a bathroom break into a community event. Of course, while the public latrinas allowed for this peculiar social interaction, the elite had their own spaces, private latrines, hidden away in their lavish homes. But even here, things weren't quite as private as they seemed. In fact, many senators and wealthy families had servants stationed just outside their private bathrooms, keeping a close ear on the inside conversations. Think of it as an early form of surveillance. It wasn't just about privacy, it was about control. Even in their most vulnerable moments, they had to keep their political strategies in check. The peculiar nature of Roman bathrooms also extended to the practice of sponge on a stick hygiene. This was, of course, before the introduction of toilet paper. The sponges were kept in a basin of salt water, which was used by the community and often shared. It wasn't just about cleanliness, though. The sponge was a cultural artifact, a conversation piece, and yes, even a symbol of Roman unity. Sharing the same sponge was symbolic of the shared Roman experience. Now, as you sit on the cold stone bench in the quiet of your private latrina, it hits you just how much the latrina and its eerie balance of isolation and exposure shaped Roman society. On the surface, it was just a utilitarian space for bodily functions, but beneath that, it was a stage for politics, gossip, and survival. You lift the sponge, half fearing it might be the last time you ever use it. The sharp scent of salt water fills your nose. You glance toward the wall, where an ancient graffiti scrawl offers a bit of solace. The best seat in the house is always at the top. You shudder at the thought of what the top might really mean in a place like this. The Romans were clever, resourceful people, but even they couldn't escape the basic human vulnerabilities of being alone with their thoughts in a latrina at the mercy of the dark, the damp, and the ever-present eye of political paranoia. Section 8. As you make your way out of the latrina, wiping your hands with a cloth, the eerie feeling of vulnerability lingers. The walls seem to close in a bit tighter than they did before, the silence now oppressive. Weighted with secrets only the Romans knew how to keep. You glance down the hall at the heavy marble columns and frescoed walls of the villa. Everything in this house is carefully constructed to protect its inhabitants, except for the latrina. It's the one place where even the highest in rank can't control the forces at play. The Romans were masters of architecture and engineering, but when it came to their toilets, they found themselves constantly battling nature. Whether it was the unpredictable flooding of the sewer system or the constant threat of vermin and vermin's predators, every visit to the latrina was a gamble. But it wasn't just rats or snakes that posed a danger. Over time, the Romans also had to contend with something even more insidious: disease. The latrina, as you might have guessed, wasn't the cleanest place on earth, and the waste system wasn't nearly as sanitary as we would like to believe today. The unrelenting humidity, the standing water, the lack of proper ventilation, all of these factors created the perfect breeding ground for bacteria and disease. But it wasn't just that. The Romans didn't yet understand germs, and as a result, their idea of hygiene was built more on superstition than on science. It's no surprise, then, that disease ran rampant in the latrinas. Some historians suggest that illnesses like dysentery and typhoid fever were common, as the same water systems used for waste were also used for drinking. It's not difficult to imagine how quickly these illnesses could spread, particularly in crowded cities like Rome. And then there was the ever-present danger of the scabies, the uncomfortable skin condition caused by microscopic mites that thrived in the unsanitary conditions of the latrina. Roman doctors, such as Galen, wrote extensively about the discomfort and irritation that came with such infestations, advising their patients on how to treat their skin with herbs and oils. The rich may have had luxurious homes, but they weren't immune to the discomfort of poor sanitation. In fact, many wealthy Romans would hire doctors specifically to treat their latrina ailments. If you had the money, you could afford a specialist to come and clear up your problems. But for the average Roman, the latrina was a place of discomfort, disease, and humiliation. Even more so for slaves and the lower classes, who had to use public latrinas with no privacy or protection from the elements. Still, there were some who tried to make the best of it. In certain areas of Rome, wealthy citizens paid for the upkeep of public latrinas, ensuring that they were at least functional and, if not clean, then at least tolerable. These latrinas were often grand affairs, built with grandiose stonework and designed to make the user feel like they were in a luxurious space, not just a dirty pit. Marble benches, running water, and even decorative statues were not uncommon. In fact, the most prestigious latrinas were built with columns and ornate carvings, often surrounded by lush gardens to make the experience a little more bearable. But no matter how fancy the latrina, the reality was the same. It was a place to do something nobody talked about openly. Yet, despite all this, the Romans continued to use their latrinas. They may have feared them, but they couldn't do without them. You walk out, your sandals clicking against the cool stone, feeling the weight of history on your shoulders. The latrina may have been a place of fear and discomfort, but it also offered something else, an undeniable connection between the very human act of survival and the highest levels of Roman power. Every senator, emperor, slave, and citizen shared this space in their own way, facing the same universal truths in the quiet, stinking solitude of the latrina. As you leave the villa's courtyard and step back into the bustling streets of Rome, it hits you. The latrina wasn't just a bathroom, it was a symbol, a reminder that no matter how powerful you were, how much marble lined your floors, or gold adorned your walls, when it came down to it, you were still just a person who needed to relieve themselves, to sweat and to strain, to pray and to curse, all in the same place where the rest of Rome did. And in that, perhaps, there was a strange sort of equality. Section 9. You're still walking through the streets of Rome, and as you pass by the bustling markets and the chattering crowds, something dawns on you. The fear and humiliation tied to the latrina didn't just exist in the spaces themselves. No, the true terror came from outside, from what the latrina symbolized to the public, because in Rome, even the act of using the bathroom could have lasting consequences for your reputation. You see, in the heart of Roman society, status wasn't just about what you wore, what you owned, or how much land you controlled. It was about how you presented yourself, even in the most private, vulnerable moments. Romans were obsessed with reputation, and even a moment spent in a latrina could be a point of political leverage. The public latrina wasn't just a space to relieve yourself. It was a public forum, a place where you could be watched, overheard, and judged. And it wasn't just a matter of overhearing your embarrassing bowel sounds or noticing that you took a bit too long. It was about what your behavior in the latrina revealed about your health, your character, and your ability to rule. Let's face it, a man who couldn't control his body couldn't control Rome. If you spent too long in the latrina, people might start whispering, maybe he's ill, maybe his digestion is poor, maybe he's losing control of his mind too. The rumors would spread like wildfire. And because the Senate was such a tightly knit group of elites, reputation was everything. Weakness or illness, real or perceived, was a clear sign of vulnerability. If you were known to frequent the latrina too often, or if the servants heard you groaning behind the curtain, your rivals would seize that. Political rivals would use that information to undermine your position. Did you hear? Senator A spends half his time on the latrina. Maybe he's not as fit to rule as we thought. Even the act of sitting down in a public latrina could be used against you. You had no privacy, no control. You were exposed. And if anyone wanted to take advantage of that, they knew exactly where to find you. Let's go back to the story of the famous political maneuvering that occurred within the latrina's walls. Some say that a specific senator, who shall remain unnamed for historical propriety, fell victim to a plot that took place entirely within the confines of the latrina. Rumor has it that an enemy, with the help of a group of conspirators, waited for the senator's predictable visit to a public latrina. While the senator was engaged in his most vulnerable moment, the conspirators, posing as servants, slipped into the facility and placed a poisoned dagger behind the marble bench. Later that day, the senator fell ill, severe pain, stomach cramps. He tried to make his way back home, but collapsed in the street, not far from the latrina. He was dead by sunrise. Historians still argue whether it was food poisoning, a slow-acting poison, or just a tragic coincidence. But there's no denying that the latrina became a place where secrets were kept and assassinations were planned, often when no one expected it. In some respects, the latrina became the symbol of powerlessness. You could be the most powerful man in Rome, but all your wealth, your guards, your statues, your feasts, none of it could protect you from the most basic human need. The latrina was where the facade crumbled. In a world of public performance, where everything was a display, the latrina was the one place where everything was exposed. And for the elite, that exposure could be fatal. The senators knew this too. Some even put their most trusted slaves or bodyguards in charge of guarding their latrinas. These guards weren't just watching for criminals. They were watching for anyone who might try to use the latrina for political leverage. Perhaps someone would use the moment to strike. Perhaps they would just listen for a little too long. What's more, in some of the wealthier homes, the latrina was connected to a larger system of water and waste that had been engineered meticulously. But that system wasn't foolproof. The Romans didn't fully understand disease transmission at the time. They had no idea that what flowed through their sewers wasn't just waste. It was bacteria, disease, and parasites. Every time you sat down in a latrina, you were in danger, a threat to your health, your reputation, and your life. But that didn't stop the Senate. They kept going. They kept using the latrina day after day, despite the terror that surrounded it. The Roman elite, ever clever and resourceful, found ways to adapt. They used herbs, spices, and oils to mask the smells. They installed cooling systems to circulate fresh air. They paid for luxurious decorations to make the space feel more like a garden than a cesspool. But the fear, the vulnerability, and the constant danger never went away. And as you step in to the bright sunlight of the Roman streets, you realize something that the ancient senators knew well. The latrina, for all its discomfort and humiliation, was an inescapable part of life, but it also shaped how you viewed the world. Because in Rome, the true battle wasn't on the Senate floor. It was in the latrina. Section 10. You've walked through the streets of Rome, the warmth of the sun brushing your shoulders, but a nagging feeling remains. It's that odd, lingering truth you can't shake off. The latrina, a simple place of bodily necessity, has always been more than just a bathroom. It's been a symbol of fear, secrecy, and vulnerability for the powerful. Even the mightiest could not escape its grasp. As you pause in front of a grand villa, your thoughts return to one final, disturbing aspect of the latrina that shaped the Roman elite's fears. The use of the latrina as a space to manipulate, control, and occasionally to destroy. Roman emperors were well aware of the power of perception, but even they couldn't avoid the inherent vulnerability of using a public latrina. An emperor could command legions, organize feasts for the gods, and build grand structures, but in the latrina, the emperor was just another man. The fear of public exposure was one that transcended political ranks and found its home in the humble latrina. One emperor, in particular, stands out in the annals of Roman history for his cautious relationship with the latrina. Emperor Nero, infamous for his erratic behavior and cruelty, reportedly had a private latrina built inside the imperial palace. But even his luxurious, carefully controlled space couldn't entirely protect him. After all, even the emperor's closest advisors and servants would have access to the area. And as we've learned, a well-timed whisper in the latrina could change the course of an empire. Nero, according to some accounts, would go to great lengths to ensure his privacy while using the latrina. Guards were posted at the door, and special precautions were taken to prevent eavesdropping. Despite his luxurious control of every other facet of life in the palace, Nero's paranoia ran so deep that even in this most private space, he couldn't escape the fear that someone was always listening, plotting, and waiting. In the end, it wasn't just physical threats that haunted the latrina. It was the idea of being exposed, of losing control, of being seen in a moment of pure vulnerability. And it was that fear that ultimately eroded the sense of security within the Roman Empire. And then there's the ultimate horror for any Roman elite: dying in the latrina, the final, most undignified fall from power. In ancient Rome, there were countless rumors about powerful men who had been assassinated in their latrinas. Some were poisoned, others were strangled. The latrina was an ideal assassination spot. Confined space, no escape, minimal witnesses. A quick strike in the most private of spaces was often the most effective. The idea of dying in the latrina was more than just a physical death. It symbolized the fall from grace, the loss of dignity, the loss of control. It was, quite literally, the ultimate humiliation. And yet, for all the Roman elite's wealth, their magnificent homes, their carefully controlled lives, none of them were safe from the most basic human needs. As you walk past the grand villa, the sounds of the street around you fade into the background. It's almost as though the world is holding its breath. The idea of power, control, and vulnerability circles around your mind, and it hits you. The latrina was more than just a bathroom. It was a mirror for society, a place where power and weakness, pride and shame, dignity and disgrace all met on equal footing. Even emperors, senators, and generals who wielded the strength of the empire could not escape the latrina's grip. It was here that they too had to confront their own mortality, their own humanity, their own vulnerability. And it was this vulnerability that in many ways kept them grounded in the ever-present uncertainty of Roman life. The fear that emanated from the latrina wasn't just physical, it was existential. It was the fear that no matter how high you rose in Roman society, no matter how many legions you commanded, you were still subject to the same bodily needs, the same frailties, the same inevitable end as anyone else. There was no escaping it, not for the plebeian, not for the senator, not even for the emperor. As you return to the quiet of your own home, you reflect on the strange power of the latrina. In the midst of all the chaos and power struggles of Roman society, it remained the great equalizer, a place where all, no matter their status, were reduced to their most basic, vulnerable selves. And in that vulnerability, you realize, lay a strange, unsettling form of equality. In the end, perhaps the latrina wasn't just about fear. Maybe, just maybe, it was about understanding. Understanding that no matter how much we build, how much we gain, how much we control, the one thing we cannot escape is the vulnerability of being human. Section 11. As you sit quietly in your villa now, the day winding down, the hum of the city fading into the evening air, something shifts in your thoughts. The latrina, that humble, feared space, wasn't merely a reflection of vulnerability. It was, perhaps, the place where Romans found their most honest selves. It forced them to confront the most fundamental parts of existence, the things we all share, regardless of power or prestige. But there's something else, something deeper, that kept bringing you back to the latrina. You realize it's not just the fear, nor the political intrigue, nor the momentary embarrassment of a vulnerable human act. It's what happened after the visit to the latrina that gave it power. Rome was a city of spectacle, a city built on performance. Every action was carefully calculated, every word analyzed, every step observed by the watching eyes of the Senate, the streets, the forums. Everything was a display, a battle for status, an exercise in control. Except for the latrina. The latrina was the place where Romans couldn't hide their weaknesses. Here, no one was a senator or emperor or slave. You were just human. You take a deep breath, the quiet room around you reminding you of how much you've come to understand. The latrina's power wasn't just about fear. It was about acceptance. In that small, secluded space, a Roman citizen could for just a moment let down their guard and acknowledge their humanity, their need, their vulnerability. And while those moments were fleeting, they were far more powerful than any political speech or military conquest. But even so, there was something unsettling about how deeply the fear of the latrina permeated Roman society. This fear wasn't just about being caught in a moment of weakness. It was about the constant reminder that no matter how much power you had, you were always at the mercy of something uncontrollable. Historians still argue about the extent to which this fear affected Roman rulers. Some claim that the latrina's psychological grip on the Roman elite was exaggerated. After all, these were the same men who built an empire, commanded armies, and orchestrated world-changing decisions. Yet, it's hard to ignore the odd little details about Roman toilets that continue to haunt the pages of history. The heightened paranoia, the detailed security measures, the strange rituals of protection. And then there's the final irony, the fact that even the emperor, who lived with such unimaginable power, could never escape this vulnerability. They could command legions, shape destinies, and conquer lands. Yet in the latrina, they were no different from anyone else. A momentary lapse in dignity, in control. Perhaps that was what truly made the latrina so terrifying. It wasn't the snakes, the rats, or the potential for disease. It was the absolute equality it represented. You think of the stories of emperors, senators, and generals who feared their latrinas like nothing else in their empire. Of the assassination attempts, the political plots, the whispers of conspiracies. You think of the men who were found dead in those latrinas, their power slipping away in their most vulnerable moment. But in the end, it's clear the latrina was more than just a tool of fear and paranoia. It was a necessary part of Roman life. It was a space where humanity met its most basic needs, where status and wealth didn't matter. For all the fear it inspired, for all the death and intrigue it concealed, it was also a place of raw honesty. It wasn't the death of an emperor that made the latrina so significant. It was the acknowledgement that no one, not even the emperor, was immune to the same basic human experiences that connected them all. As you settle into the quiet of the evening, the understanding that the latrina was a powerful space full of contradictions and complexities feels almost comforting. It wasn't just a room of fear. It was a reminder that power, wealth, and influence, no matter how great, couldn't shield you from the most human of needs. And maybe that's the most poignant truth of all. The latrina didn't just expose the Roman elite. It exposed humanity itself. Now, as the final whispers of the day fade into the night, you realize that the latrina, in all its horror, was a necessary part of every Roman's journey. Because in its darkness, its dirt, and its undeniable presence, it held the key to understanding the fragile nature of human life, the fragility that bound everyone, emperor and slave alike, together in the end. Section 12. The night has fully settled over the city now, and the quiet solitude of your thoughts seems to pull you deeper into reflection. You sit there, absorbed in the concept that the latrina, a place so seemingly ordinary, yet so deeply fraught with tension, has been the very axis upon which Roman fears, political maneuvering, and even the reality of death itself pivoted. The latrina wasn't just a bathroom. It was an arena, a stage for human vulnerability. And in that vulnerability, Romans found not only their greatest fears, but also their greatest truths. As you ponder this, your thoughts return to the way the Romans approached the human body. For a society so obsessed with control, beauty, and the cultivation of power, it's fascinating that they place so much significance on their bodily functions. The latrina wasn't simply about doing one's business. It was an intricate part of maintaining one's reputation, one's dignity, and ultimately one's place in the empire. The emphasis on hygiene and public health, albeit rudimentary by today's standards, was more than a practical necessity. In Rome, cleanliness and personal care were tied to status and identity. Senators and emperors had their personal latrinas, designed with beauty and comfort in mind, while the lower classes, especially slaves and commoners, had to make do with communal, often unsanitary public latrinas. The contrast was stark. To be wealthy, to be powerful, was to have access to the cleanest, most private, most luxurious latrinas. To be poor, to be marginalized, was to be exposed to the worst of the filth, to be subjected to the discomfort and humiliation of public latrinas. But despite these divisions, the latrina connected them all. The powerful feared it, the poor suffered from it, but in the end, no one could avoid it. In its most basic form, the latrina was a reminder of the fragility of life, of the humanity that tied every citizen together, regardless of class, status, or wealth. In this small, confined space, the truth was undeniable. The same body that commanded armies and legislated law was also the body that sweated, groaned, and needed to relieve itself. You think about how the latrina was treated like a necessary evil. Those who frequented it, the rich and the poor, the highborn and the lowborn, came face to face with their mortality. For all their accomplishments, their wealth, and their triumphs, the latrina reduced them to the simplest human act: survival, a reminder that at the core of it all, we are all human, all prone to the same weaknesses, all struggling with the same biological needs. It's a thought that carries an odd comfort with it, a quiet humility in the face of Roman grandeur. And then you begin to think of how the latrina's role in Roman society continued to evolve, shaping the way Romans viewed their bodies, their health, and their place in the world. Over time, advancements in engineering and plumbing would make the latrina a more sanitary, more private space. But the legacy of the Roman latrina as a symbol of human vulnerability, fear, and equality remains. The latrina wasn't just a tool, it was a cultural artifact, a symbol of how far the Roman Empire stretched its efforts to control every aspect of life, even the most personal and intimate. But now, in the quiet of your own thoughts, you realize that perhaps the most telling aspect of the latrina's role in Roman life wasn't the fear it instilled, nor the secrets it kept, but the simple truth that it held the potential to shape the lives of those who used it. The Roman latrina was a place where, for a brief moment, even the most powerful men and women could reflect on their shared humanity, as raw and unembellished as the act of relieving oneself. You smile softly to yourself, thinking of all the powerful figures of Rome, emperors, senators, generals, who were brought low in the latrina. In the end, the emperor's crown meant nothing there. The toga, the sandals, the gold, they were all left behind in favor of something more basic: survival. The latrina was the ultimate test of strength, not of body, but of will. To enter it was to embrace the undeniable fact that no one could escape the fragility of being human. And so, as you sit here, reflecting on the stories and the layers of history that surround the latrina, you realize that perhaps it was this space, the most mundane, the most humbling, that taught the Romans their most valuable lesson. Control is an illusion. No matter how much power you wield, how high you rise, there is always something beyond your reach, something that will remind you of your fragility. The latrina, it seems, was the only place in the Roman Empire where all that power, all that grandeur, could be washed away with a single, inevitable act of nature, a humbling act that reminded them of what they truly were, mortal. And as the night deepens and the quiet settles around you, you feel the weight of this realization. For in the latrina, the Romans discovered something about themselves that even they couldn't ignore. Section 13. As the night stretches on, the final thoughts about the latrina, its symbolic weight, its connection to both power and humility, linger in your mind. You can't help but marvel at how something so simple, so often dismissed as an unpleasant necessity, was, in reality, one of the most complex spaces in all of Roman life. It was a place where every Roman, no matter their station, was forced to confront their own humanity. A place where the emperors, generals, slaves, and citizens all experienced vulnerability in the same way. But it wasn't just the physical experience that shaped the legacy of the latrina. The way Romans adapted to it, how they built their homes and their cities around it, speaks volumes about their need for control and order, even in the most basic of human needs. Their latrinas weren't just functional. They were a microcosm of the empire's obsession with maintaining power, even in the most private moments. The lavish latrinas built in wealthy homes were a status symbol, as if to say, we have conquered nature, even in our most intimate spaces. In contrast, the public latrina was a symbol of the empire's collective nature. It wasn't about luxury. It was about communal existence, about sharing in the most basic aspects of life. The lower classes, the slaves, and the plebeians had no grand marble seats or frescoed walls to comfort them. They had stone benches, shared sponges, and the raw exposure of being seen by anyone who passed by. But still, there was a strange, almost poetic equality in this. The rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, sat side by side, brought together by the basic needs of the human body. For a moment, everyone was the same. And that's what made the latrina so powerful. It stripped away the layers of pretense, the facades of power, and reduced everyone to the same biological truth. Yet, in the shared space, there was also an inherent fear. The fear that no matter how high your status, no matter how grand your palace, there was always something just beneath the surface, something beyond your control. The ever-present threat of disease, the lurking danger of assassins, and the constant possibility of public humiliation in a place where everyone could hear, smell, and see your every move. The Roman fear of the latrina, the unease that settled in every visit, was more than just a physical or political threat. It was an existential one. The act of sitting on the latrina bench, of performing the most basic human task, was a stark reminder that in the end, we are all human. Even the emperor, with all his power and glory, couldn't escape this fundamental truth. No one could. Perhaps that's why the latrina was treated with such reverence. It wasn't just a space to relieve oneself. It was a space that revealed the fragility of life. It was a space that humbled even the most powerful. It was the ultimate reminder that no matter how much control we exert over the world, there are things we simply can't master. As you sit in your quiet space, reflecting on all this, you realize that the latrina's influence didn't end with the fall of the Roman Empire. It has lived on in the way we approach vulnerability today. The fear of being exposed, of being powerless, is something every society grapples with. It's why we seek privacy, why we build barriers around ourselves to keep others at bay. It's why we fear moments when we can't hide behind a persona, when we can't control the narrative. And as you think back on everything the latrina represented, its dual role as a symbol of both terror and equality, it becomes clear that it wasn't just a place of death and danger. It was also a place of reflection, a place where even the most powerful were forced to confront the inevitable truth of their existence. That, at the end of the day, we are all bound by the same limitations, and that is a truth no amount of marble, no toga, no crown can protect you from. In the silence of the night, you realize that the legacy of the latrina is still with us. It lives on in the way we navigate our own vulnerabilities, the way we guard our weaknesses, and the way we fear exposure. But the latrina also teaches us something deeper, something that the Romans knew all too well. It teaches us that vulnerability is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced, because in that vulnerability lies the truest form of equality. In the end, the latrina was not just a space of humiliation. It was a place where the Romans confronted their most honest, raw selves. It was a space that forced them to recognize their humanity, to face the most basic truth of all. No matter how high they climbed, they were still human, with human needs and human fears. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made it so powerful. Section 14. The night deepens further, and you find yourself drawn back into the haunting idea that the latrina, with all its complexities, still shapes how we think about privacy, vulnerability, and fear. After all, even in our modern world, there's something about the act of being seen in our most exposed state that stirs discomfort. The Romans were no different, except their discomfort played out in grander, more dramatic ways. It was a place where status, power, and identity were stripped away, leaving only the raw human experience. But beyond the fear, there was also an element of acceptance, an acceptance that transcended class, wealth, and privilege. The latrina was, in its own strange way, democratic. No matter how much marble adorned your villa, or how many legions you commanded, you would still sit, vulnerable, on that cold stone seat. You would still be reduced to the most basic of human needs. And perhaps that was the most humbling part of the experience. In this small, seemingly insignificant space, the power structure collapsed. There were no emperors, there were no senators, just people. And as this thought takes root in your mind, something else becomes clear. The latrina was not just about what it took away. It was also about what it gave. It gave the people of Rome a shared space, a place where status didn't matter, a place where they could be united, even in the most uncomfortable of circumstances. It was a space of equality, not because everyone sat in the same room, but because everyone was reduced to their most basic selves. The Roman Empire may have been built on power, politics, and conquest, but in the latrina, everyone was just another person, struggling with the same bodily needs. You walk down the streets, reflecting on the strange paradox of the latrina's place in Roman society. It was feared, yes. It was seen as dangerous, as a space where conspiracies were hatched and lives were lost. But it was also essential. It was a part of Roman life, as intrinsic as the Forum, the Senate, or the baths. And in that paradox of fear and necessity, of humiliation and equality, the true power of the latrina reveals itself. The latrina also served as a reminder of Roman ingenuity. Despite the dangers, the filth, and the discomfort, the Romans devised ways to make their bathrooms more efficient, cleaner, and even a little more luxurious. Their sewers, the Cloaca Maxima, were a marvel of engineering, capable of handling waste from the grandest villas to the humblest tenements. The public latrinas, though often cramped and unsanitary, were designed to accommodate large numbers of people, a feat of social and architectural planning that allowed the empire to thrive. But even with all this ingenuity, the latrina never lost its symbolic significance. It remained a place where Romans confronted their own mortality. The sewers, the drains, the pipes, they all carried more than just waste. They carried the fears of the Roman people. They were the silent, unseen force that moved through the streets of Rome, reminding everyone that no matter how much power they held, they were still subject to the most basic and uncontrollable aspects of life. And as you stand there, gazing at the flickering light of the lamp in the distance, you can't help but think of how the latrina wasn't just a Roman invention. It was a universal experience. Throughout history, in every culture, every civilization, people have had to confront the same truths in their most vulnerable moments. The latrina, in a way, was a bridge between the past and the present, between the mighty and the lowly. It served as a reminder that we are all human, no matter how far we've come, how much we've achieved, or how high we've climbed. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the latrina is the lesson of humility. It teaches us that no matter how powerful we think we are all vulnerable. We all have to face our fears, our weaknesses, and our mortality. And in that shared experience, there is a strange, uncomfortable equality. Because no matter who we are, no matter what we do, we all need the latrina. We all need a place to acknowledge that we are more than just our status, our wealth, or our power. We are, at our core, human. And that is a truth that no amount of marble, no amount of gold can ever change. You walk back toward the quiet of your home, the echoes of the Roman streets fading away. The latrina may have been a place of fear, but it was also a place of truth, a place where vulnerability met reality, where power met fragility, and where the humbling experience of being human could not be avoided. In that small, often overlooked space, the Romans found something that transcended all their fears, the undeniable truth that no one, no matter how high they rose, could escape the fundamental equality of the human experience. And as you close the door behind you, the quiet settles in once again. The day is done, and with it, the reflection on the power of the latrina fades into the night. But you know, deep down, that the lessons it taught about vulnerability, humility, and equality will linger long after the echoes of the past have faded away. Section 15. As the last of the evening light flickers away and the room fills with the stillness of the night, you sit back in the quiet of your space, reflecting on everything the latrina represented in the heart of Roman society. The simple, mundane task of relieving oneself, something we all must do, holds an almost mythical significance in Roman history, stretching its influence far beyond what most would consider the everyday. The latrina wasn't just a place for bodily function. It was a microcosm of Roman values, fears, and the ever-present balancing act between power and vulnerability. As you sit there in this moment of quiet contemplation, a thought lingers. What if this moment, this very experience of being human, of being vulnerable, was the true secret of Rome's success? Not the military conquests, not the power struggles of the Senate, but the shared humility of the latrina. You see, the latrina reminded Romans of something they tried so hard to forget: their own frailty. No matter how high your status, how ornate your villa, or how many legions you commanded, in the latrina, you were stripped of it all. There, beneath the marble floors, beneath the golden palaces, were just people, real people, with real needs, real weaknesses, and real fears. In the latrina, no one was immune from the universal experience of being human. And it wasn't just the physical act of using the latrina that bound Romans together. It was the cultural awareness that even the mightiest could be brought low in this one unavoidable moment. The fear of exposure, the embarrassment of vulnerability, was a fear that reached every class in Roman society. Even emperors and generals could not escape this basic truth. Roman life was built on an image of control, of domination over nature, over people, over the land. Yet in the latrina, the very symbol of Roman achievement and engineering, the grandeur of aqueducts, the luxury of marble baths, was brought to a halt. The latrina, for all its terrifying potential and political danger, was perhaps the one space in all of Rome where everyone, from the slave to the senator, confronted the same unyielding truth. No one was truly in control of their fate. No one could escape the frailty of the human condition. And so, as the night continues to stretch on, you feel the weight of this realization. The latrina, this space that so many feared, that so many tried to make a symbol of their power or attempt at control, was in fact a space that highlighted Rome's greatest lesson: equality in mortality. It wasn't just a place for bodily relief. It was a place where Romans found an uncomfortable, undeniable connection between themselves and their fellow citizens, no matter their rank. In the latrina, the Roman elite didn't just confront their bodies. They confronted the fundamental truth that no amount of power, no amount of wealth could shelter them from the most basic of human needs. Even emperors were reduced to their most vulnerable selves in those marble chambers, just like any common citizen. Their names may have been carved into statues, their faces immortalized in coins, but when they entered the latrina, they were no different than anyone else. The legacy of the latrina, then, isn't just one of fear or humiliation. It's a reminder that even in the heights of power, we all face the same inevitable truth. We are human, and in that shared experience, there is a strange form of equality. And so, as you sit in this quiet moment, reflecting on the power, the symbolism, and the raw honesty of the latrina, you realize something else. Perhaps the greatest lesson the Romans left behind wasn't about their conquests, their architectural wonders, or their political games. It was their understanding of what it means to be human. It was the realization that even in their greatest moments of power, The Romans were still bound by the same human limitations, fears, and vulnerabilities as everyone else. In the end, the latrina teaches us not just about the Romans, but about ourselves. It reminds us that no matter how much we achieve, no matter how far we rise, we are still, at our core, human, fragile, vulnerable, and deeply connected to those around us. And as the final whispers of the day fade into the night, you understand. The latrina may have been a place of fear, of vulnerability, and of humiliation, but it was also a place of truth, a place where the mighty and the weak stood together, face to face with the one thing they could not control, their humanity. Now, as the room grows dark and the quiet surrounds you, you feel the calm realization that this simple space, this overlooked, feared part of Roman life, may have held the key to understanding the true nature of power, vulnerability, and equality.